Welcome back. We're talking with Sam Faddis, a distinguished former clandestine services operative of the Central Intelligence Agency, the author of an important book on his experiences there, The Decline and Fall Beyond Repair, The Decline and Fall of the CIA. He is also the driving force behind a terrific online resource. It's called andmagazine.com, and you can follow him there at Substack. Sam, we're talking about an operation within blocks of the United States Capitol by people whose exact purposes are unclear, but it was clearly a well financed and ominous undertaking, not least because it does appear that they successfully penetrated the protective details of the Secret Service, including that of the First Lady of the United States, Jill Biden, and the White House itself. As a guy who used to do this kind of thing for a living, tell us what that suggests is the nature of the problem. Four individuals, as I understand it, have been put on administrative leave from the Secret Service. Um, how serious a problem do you think this represents?
Yeah, I think it's a massive problem. I think everything in this case tells you that you're very likely looking at an Iranian operation intended to assassinate a senior official in the nation's capital. Everything says that. These guys, when I see everything that was in the apartment, it looks to me like everything you would expect to find in a safe house with a team that was doing what we would call the casing in preparation for an ultimate hit. The fact that they developed this relationship with the Secret Service guys and got it as far as they did is shocking and says some really not not good things about the CI consciousness, counterintelligence consciousness of the Secret Service. And they were apparently tipped at some point. They received, when the FBI was focusing on them, they received an email, as I understand it, from a member of the Secret Service, which in some way or the other it tipped them to the fact that an investigation was ongoing. That remains a little hazy, but that raises a zillion questions of its own. Why is the Secret Service guy in the middle of an investigation emailing the targets at all? And what would possibly have been in that email that would have tipped them? Why would he be disclosing this? So you're not just talking about guys that maybe didn't have their guard up enough in the Secret Service, but now you begin to wonder, have in fact some of them really been compromised? Were they in league with these individuals? I would be I would be suggesting the Secret Service turn the place upside down. You not just suspend these four guys, but you need to get to the bottom of how far this goes.
Well, and how big a problem this is, if as you say, and I'm sure it's correct that that tip did uh, require action to grab these guys before the full investigation ran its course. The ability to figure out whether there were other operatives already here as well, whether they were beyond the point where they were simply casing the joint or setting up a strike of some kind. Um, those are the sorts of questions that obviously inquiring minds want to know at this point. But it goes to something that we've talked about many times in other contexts, notably, of course, in connection with communist China and its operations, Sam, its elite capture, especially. And that is, what is the state of our counterintelligence at the moment? This particular operation, I guess, was evidently rolled up, at least initially, by a United States Postal Service inspector who, through an unlikely set of circumstances, simply tumbled onto these guys, and that led to further investigation by others, including the FBI. But are we really asleep at the switch here, or worse, as your comment just now suggests, maybe even having people who are supposed to be at the switch complicit in endangering us?
Well, I think at a minimum we're asleep at the switch, right, Frank? I mean, that would be the best case. That's how horrible this is. That all we're looking at is shocking incompetence. I mean, if you're Secret Service agents, obviously everything about you, your information, your duties, and so forth That's very sensitive information and incredibly valuable to any adversary. And you ought to just have your CI antenna up all the time. Anybody who's buddying up to you, cozying up to you, buying you presents, that ought to set off
Giving you a
alarm bells.
rent-free luxury apartment for a year. I mean, that's a
You
little
ought to
bit of
be
a clue, don't you
you
think?
ought to be reporting that guy the next day, running his name
No
and telling
kidding.
your boss about it. That's what you ought
Yeah.
to be doing.
And if you shouldn't, I mean, is that not grounds for separation from the service, at the very minimum, if not actual prosecution?
Well, it ought to be ground. I don't know exactly what their rules are, but if their rules don't require that, then they absolutely should.
Yeah, absolutely. Sam, let me ask you about another aspect of this. As I mentioned in the opening comment, um, this magistrate judge by the name of Michael Harvey has seen fit, on the basis of the evidence that has been presented thus far, some of which seems very troubling for the reasons that you've outlined. But these guys, really, there's no evidence of a violent crime, and they should be released. He fortunately hasn't let them go entirely. He's set them loose on bail, but put them in home detention. What does that say about the mindset of, in this case, a single judge, I guess, but more generally, the degree to which we as a society now fail to appreciate actual threats to our homeland that could be very, very dangerous indeed?
Yeah, it's shocking. As you've suggested to begin with, we don't know that these are the only two guys, right? I just said that based on their actions, I would think there's at least one more safe house. You have no idea how many of these guys there are. If they're trained intelligence operatives, one of the things you're trained to do is vanish and disappear, exfiltrate yourself. So sending them home and asking them to hang out doesn't mean they're going to stick around. They were caught with gear to make fake IDs, put vehicle tracking devices on vehicles, multiple firearms. They're acquiring data on Secret Service protective details of the president and the first lady. Somewhere in there, you don't think there's enough information to suggest really strongly that we need to hang on to these guys. So uh, I,
It
I,
certainly seems that way to me. I've got to say,
I don't think this is just incompetence. I mean, I think there is at a minimum some political bias here. And personally, I think that this guy and probably a lot of the media want to bury this story because Joe Biden's getting ready to give away the farm to the Iranians again. And one of the things he's talking about doing is lifting the terrorist designation on the IRGC. And it would be really embarrassing to discover that the IRGC simultaneously is plotting an assassination in the nation's capital while he's surrendering in Vienna.
yeah, it's a perfect send up to our next conversation with Dr. Harold Rode, is what this administration is prepared to do to ignore provocations and affronts as well, and dangerous threats indeed from Iran in pursuit of this deal. Um, Lastly, very quickly, Sam, you will remember that this Pakistani intelligence service was implicated, I think, very convincingly, frankly, in an IT congressional scandal. It simply vanished as a practical matter. Was that another example of political considerations trumping, well, common sense national security?
Yeah, I think absolutely without question. Hey, this will be inconvenient for us to address with the Pakistani government. Let's just pretend it didn't happen. That's what that is to me.
Yeah. And I'm sorry to say, at the time, this is now 5 or 6 years ago, as I recall, Paul Ryan was the Speaker of the House, and he didn't want any part of raising, I think, an appropriate alarm about what, in that case, exclusively Democratic members of Congress had done to rely on, it seems, Pakistani operatives for their IT services. A scandal. We ought to revisit it against the backdrop of this. Sam Faddis, thanks so much for your work and for joining us to talk about it from time to time. We look forward to doing so with you again next week. Next up, as promised, we'll speak with one of the country's preeminent experts on Iran and the Middle East, Dr. Harold Rode, right after this.